Learn page, when you come down to one of the tabs here called INFO123 Excel assignment, click on that. You now have a little bit of instructions and information about the percentage, the total marks, when it will be available, and when your due date is. So across all time zones, on Monday the 28th, the Excel assignment will be available to all of you from 11 a.m. and your due date is week 7, the Friday of week 7, which is on the 8th of April at 11 a.m. as well. So the assignment will be open for a whole 2 weeks. You can start whenever you feel you're ready, download the assignment, complete it, and then upload your answers. So there will be a link available for you here, as well as the instruction files and the data file for you to download and use. So if you would like to know what to expect in the Excel assignment, it will be similar to what you have done in class. So we kind of retest you on those activities that you have done for the Excel tutorials in class. Now, so that's your Excel test. That will be an assignment. It's individual, and that will be available Monday. The other link that I want you to be familiar with is the INFO123 midterm test. So when you click on that link, you will also get instructions. This will open on the 31st of March at 6 o'clock. It will remain open for 24 hours, so up to 6 p.m. 1st of April across all time zones. So it doesn't matter if you are not in New Zealand or somewhere else. However, once you download the test paper, you will only have 2 hours to complete the test, and there will be a timer running on the background so that you can then see how much time has passed and how much time you already have. So the midterm test paper will be available on this page. When you download it, you're not going to be allowed to write on the question paper. Instead, you should open a Word document and attempt the question there. So write your answers in that Word document. So just simply say question 1A, this is the answer. Question 1B, this is the answer. Save your file, and there will be a link available here to tell you that's where you now upload your answers. Now, with the midterm test, sometimes unexpected things happen. Your computer may break down. You may experience a power failure. For whatever reason, Learn may not be available for a couple of hours. If you experience any of those extenuating circumstances beyond your control, what you should do immediately is get a hold of me or get a hold of Telini. Contact us via phone or email. Take a picture if you like, if your computer has failed or you're experiencing power failure. Send that evidence back to us, and what we will do is give you a little bit more extra time so that you are compensated for the time that you didn't have power, or your computer was down, or anything that might happen. With COVID, some of you may need to self-isolate. You may not feel very well. You may not feel up to it to attempt the test. Not sure if anyone has spoken to you about special considerations. Okay, there is this whole process called special considerations in the university. Anytime you have to take an assessment that is worth more than 10%, I'm sure it's 10 or above, you have the opportunity to take it again or be compensated because you might have done it when you are not well, or if you had a bereavement in the family during that week, or if you actually get COVID and you end up in the hospital. Apply for special consideration. Provide the evidence, provide the details as to why you're applying for special consideration, and if you can, attempt the test anyway. Because what happens is we take the higher grade, so sometimes you might feel a little bit unwell, but you think you might still be able to attempt the test. Go ahead and do it. We will mark your paper as normal as possible, and then if you feel, I think I really didn't give it my best because I was unwell, apply for special consideration. So what happens at the end of the day is we get an average of your marks at the end of the semester, and we give you the benefit of doubt by giving you the highest possible grade that you might get. It's a very complex algorithm that we use. So basically, you are awarded the higher grade that you get. Sometimes based on that algorithm calculation, you might get a B, but your actual mark when you actually attempted the test would be an A+, so we would then give you the A+ instead of the B. So if you need to use special consideration, use it. But if you can, I would ask you to use the special consideration process, go through that process, and attempt the test paper if you can. Now this will only apply for the test because it's open for such a short time period. For the Excel, because you have 2 weeks, there's ample time for you to recover, I suppose. But if you think you were badly affected over that 2-week period, couldn't get out of bed, head spinning, couldn't breathe, then apply for special consideration anyway. Okay, so keep that process at the back of your mind for your entire duration being at the university. There are options if you are unwell, or if there was a bereavement in the family, or for whatever reason beyond your control. So use that when you need to. Everything okay with the test? You know where to find it? And the Excel, you know where to find it and what to do? Okay. So you will get a message on Learn just before 11 a.m. on Monday telling you that the Excel assignment is now made available. Similarly, just before 6 p.m. on the 31st of March, you'll also get another notification on Learn telling you that the paper is now available. Okay, so this is where we left off yesterday. We looked at the 4 stages of the BPM cycle. So I'm just going to recap those stages again. You start with process modeling, that's here. What you do under the process modeling stage is you basically walk through a business process and you document that business process in a visual format or in a pictorial format. So it's going to be a little bit similar to your ERD exercise. When we looked at the ERD, it was also an example of a pictorial format or an image format of how you explain what the database would look like. This time, we are also using the pictorial format or a graphical format, but instead of showing you what the details of a database is, we now show you what the business process is like in the organization, where does a document flow from one department to the other, who is responsible in that department to perform a particular job or an activity. Once you have modeled the process as is, we then start at looking at creating components or creating systems or creating applications to minimize or get rid of those business process problems that an organization might experience. That might involve developing a new system or an application. Sometimes it could be as simple as using an Excel file to keep track of activity, or an Access file to keep database to keep track of activity. Then we implement the process, the changes that you now want to introduce into the organization. Once you introduce those changes, you then assess those changes that you have now brought into the organization. Has your new processes made any change in the organization? Is the organization doing something better, faster, quicker? Is the organization now able to reduce the number of errors that it makes in a particular process? Is the organization now able to provide a customer with enhanced customer satisfaction? The BPM cycle is one that doesn't end, and sometimes in some books you will see the term continuum being used because it is a continuous process. It is a continuous cycle that some organizations revisit every 9 months to see how are things going on in my organization. Is everything going on well? Are there problems at certain parts or certain departments? And what can I now do to fix those problems I have in that organization? I'm going to give you an example scenario. I'm going to leave this with you to read through. And there are some things in here that should already trigger you to think about there are issues with the way this bank does things. Number one, you're receiving complaints from your customer. That is usually the first point for you to acknowledge that there is something we're not doing very well, and as a result of that, the customer is now experiencing problems. Either it takes too long, or it is too slow, or there are too many forms, or there are too many people that your customer now needs to speak to over the phone. The next thing is this term called benchmarking. When you want to assess how your organization is doing against others, we always benchmark our performance. We do this because we want to know what our competitors are doing, if they're doing anything better than us. We also want to know where is room for improvement for our particular organization. So in this case, 48 hours of waiting time in comparison to 1 to 12 hours waiting time from their competitors. Clearly, there is a problem here. We don't know what the problem is or where the problem is until we look at the process flow within the organization. Now, this is the subdivision or subset of other problems that might occur just because a bank takes too long to process the loan. What are the repercussions and what are the drivers for change? How might you convince an organization to get on board and start looking at their business processes, because it is high time for change? In some places, it might affect your external customer. If you were the bank, an external customer coming to you to open an account, get a home loan or a business loan, might suffer the effects of bad business processes working in an organization. You also have to remember the internal customer. So the various departments in a bank. You might have the customer service department, which will not be able to provide information to a customer when the customer calls up to say, when are you going to approve my loan? You might have problem with the compliance department in the organization. The compliance department gets someone's loan approval process and then decides that there are documentation missing. The compliance officer will now have to call up the customer to say, can you now provide me with your IRD statements? I don't have this with me, and therefore I'm not able to tell if I'm now going to approve your loan or not. To the customer, all these documents that you want should have been asked upfront. There was no need for you to ask for paperwork after paperwork after paperwork every week. This shows that there are problems with the business process in that organization. Take a look at another complaint from a customer. This is in a clinic, general practice clinic. You still have that same problem taking place, waiting too long, and the customer was now unsatisfied. In this same example, with the same clinic, the customer goes on to complain about how difficult it is to call up the GP practice to make an appointment, and the customer goes on to provide suggestions as to what should have been done. How do you now allocate specific roles to people? What business process is in place in this GP clinic when the phones ring off the hook, and when you have patients in front of you, what should the receptionist do? Prioritize the call or prioritize the patient in front of you? If you have no business processes telling the GP clinic, how do you manage patients during peak hour? How would you expect the receptionist to know what needs to be done? When it's off-peak hour, when the phones don't ring off the hook, and you don't have so many patients in front of you trying to pay a bill or make another appointment or coming to receive a vaccination for that matter, the business process problems will not be highlighted. You wouldn't know in an organization that we have problems. It is only when organizations are pressured, when there is tension among all the various departments, when everyone within the department is trying to fulfill their role or obligation or responsibility, it is only then that you now start seeing problems or issues with business processes. This one here, another complaint by another patient in the same practice, telling you the effect of having to wait, the effects that this patient now suffers because you have improper scheduling, booking, appointment systems. So usually, when you want to know if business processes are going on well in your organization, ask your external facing customers. They would be the first people to point out to you where the pain points of your processes are. And sometimes they can very well tell you what needs to be done so that that problem does not happen over and over again. Some organizations look at these complaints and do nothing about it. Perhaps for them it is not urgent, it is not important. Whereas other organizations value customer feedback and complaints. They look at it on a daily basis and they ask the team, what's the problem here? Where did the problem start from? How did the problem continue to flow across different departments? And how did the organization allow an error taking place in step 1 to follow through all the way to step number 20? Now, this one is in a cafe. Slow, again, standard problems with most organizations. And so here yet again you have yet another business problem that perhaps might be fixed or might not be fixed. Let's have a look at the scope. You've now learned a little bit about business processes. You now need to define the boundary of change, because this is what you're going to do. You're going to walk into an organization, you're going to look at a department, and then you're going to make a suggestion. Does anything need to change in a particular department? Or does the change need to happen in the other department? Or does the change need to happen across all departments in the organization? When we refer to a functional change or a functional scope, it means I'm only dealing with a particular department and that is it. Usually, business management projects that deal with functional scope or functional boundary are very quick, very easy, very low risk, doesn't require too much commitment. And then we look at cross-functional boundaries, where you now have to involve 2 or more departments within the same organization. This is where I gave you the example yesterday, when you are buying a book on Amazon, and if Amazon wants to make suggestions and ask you to buy other books, this requires coordination between 2 different departments, sales and customer relationship. If those 2 departments say, I'm not going to help you, we are going to have a problem. Because if you make suggestions to encourage upsell of books for a customer, the sales department benefits because you get more money. The customer relationship department also benefits because you're using data, business intelligence, the stuff that you have stored inside your data warehouse, so that it now becomes a little bit more meaningful. What is the customer buying? Why is the customer buying this? And how can I use this data to provide a discount? Encourage more purchasing in the future. Inter-organization is very tricky, very hard to implement, very risky, because it involves 2 or more separate entities, different organizations. So in my example yesterday, when you are on Amazon and when you have keyed in your credit card details and clicked on pay, that's when 2 different processes are triggered by 2 different organizations. The bank triggers another process to check your credit card details. The sales department triggers off another process, so that as soon as the bank gives you an approval, as soon as the payment goes through, you get an email sitting in your inbox telling you successful payment and that your books will be delivered in the next 3 to 5 days. Remember, when you now have to work with other organizations beyond your control, they may have their own business rules and regulations to follow. So the only way to come to a compromise here is by negotiation. You sign a contract, you agree on service level agreements, meaning minimum standards for you to operate, and you go from there. So This is just a repeat of cross-functional processes, isolated processes, and what happens when you don't have departments that are working together in an organization and your inter-organization change. What happens when you don't have separate organizations working together and doing things on their own. So let's start by looking at what business process modeling would look like. So if you don't get your processes done well, or it's not efficient, don't introduce information systems. You need to clean up your processes first. Once they are working well and fine, and you don't have any pain points, and you can nicely see a flow and structure between one department to the other, or one organization to the next, only then start saying, how can we make things faster? How can we increase efficiency? How can we increase effectiveness? And one way for you to do that is to look at process modeling. Business process notation modeling looks like that. You would only see a couple of characters that you will now need to use when you start drawing your diagrams. So you have the start button, you have the end button, you have the rectangle which depicts an activity, you have a decision tree, and then you have data. It could be a piece of document, it could be information, and you have process flow and message flow. When you put all this together to document your as-is, this is what a BPNM diagram would look like. So remember, this is step 1, create models. This is what you're doing when we say step 1. You're documenting the business process as it is, based on your understanding, based on your observation, based on you interviewing the employees working in an organization. You might ask them, tell me, what do you do when you receive a loan application form? What do you do first? What do you do next? What do you check for? What do you not check for? Does anyone sign on that form? Who do you now give that loan document to? To which department? Does that loan document come back to you at some point in time? Or do you not see that loan document anymore? And then you might ask this person, how many loan documents do you process in a day? Let's assume this person says, I look at 50 loan documents from 9 to 5. You might want to ask this person, are all the loan documents that you see complete? Do you ever find a loan document where you have parts of it unfilled or parts of it filled with incorrect data? If you do see those types of loan documents, what do you do with them? Do you continue to process it? Do you return it back to the customer? Do you throw it into the trash bin? Well, you hope that this person doesn't do the third option, because then you have loan forms into the trash bin with customers not knowing what's happening. So you look at this diagram, and I'm going to now explain this diagram to you. In this diagram, you are looking at 5 actors. These actors are the customer, the sales department, the contracts department, the legal department, and the fulfillment department. These are the 5 actors involved in this process when a customer submits a purchase order. The actor could be a department. The actor could also be a person. So in this example, customer is a person, and the legal, contract, sales, fulfillment are all departments. Each actor sits in a particular swim lane. So you must draw swim lanes. Imagine swimming in an Olympic-sized pool, and you have lanes, and you can only swim on your lane. You get disqualified when you enter somebody else's lane. Any activity you draw must be associated to a particular actor's swim lane. And when you read this diagram, you start right at the beginning where the customer submits a purchase order. That purchase order goes into the sales department. A sales representative logs the purchase order and perhaps enters the order into a computerized system. The contracts department has a look at that order and has to make a decision, because remember from the earlier slide, that that diamond that you see there, that diamond shaped object is a decision. And when you have a decision, there are two possible outputs that can come out from a decision. It could be a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, that will follow through by other processes. If it's a no, you will also have other processes that you will now have to follow through. So the contracts department looks at the order and will first have to check to make sure that the order fits standard terms. If the order fits standard terms, so follow the yes to come out from the diamond, the contracts department informs the agent and approves the order. Once the contracts department approves the order, it goes to the fulfillment swim lane. Take note that you do not need to do anything with the legal department. So you flow, that document flows through across to the fulfillment department. You pick up the order, you log the shipment, and the shipment is now sent off. So that was in a situation where the contract fit with standard terms. Let's now go back, and the contract department now looks at the purchase, looks at the order, and you now ask the question, does this order now fit standard terms? And if the answer is no, come down here, and you now trigger off a separate set of activities that need to follow through. That separate set of activities will include the contracts department requesting for approval from the legal department, because it's not one that is standard, so you now have to ask the lawyers, can I accept this modified order? And the lawyers look at it and say, no, you cannot accept this is illegal, not allowed. If it's a no, the lawyer marks the order as no, returns it back to the agent. The contractors will then cancel that order. The sales rep is now notified that your order has been cancelled and we will not proceed with it anymore. And similarly, the contracts department now provides a note to say order not shipped, because it's an order that's now been cancelled. Let's come back here again with the lawyers. If this is now going to be a change that is acceptable to the lawyers, you go up here and read the yes column, and it says, attorney says it's fine, the lawyer says it is fine, mark it as okay, return that to the agent. The agent is now aware, the contracts department is now aware that it is approved, and the order is now fulfilled by the fulfillment department, and you now ship the order as it is. This is how you document a process flow within an organization. This is just an example of one process flow where a customer makes a purchase order. A customer might decide to cancel a purchase order. You will need to draw a different BPNM diagram. If the customer provides a purchase order and then in 3 days' time decides, I need to modify my purchase order, I need 500 cans of paint, not 200, you then trigger a different business process flow for that. When you look at BPNM diagrams, because it represents as is, there will be process problems in every business process notation diagram. What I want you to do now is use a magnifying glass, go through this process with a fine-tooth comb. I want you to become the consultant and you tell me, where are the errors in this process? Where can you possibly spot the errors? What have they done wrongly? What should they have done instead? And how can you recommend a solution to this business process? follow through the process and you tell me where the errors are. Look at it very, very carefully and ask yourselves, have we missed out something? Have we forgotten to inform an actor of a particular outcome? Are all the actors in this process flow aware of what is happening? Will they be consistently informed? Pay particular attention to the customer. The customer places the order and that is it. After the customer places the order, nothing goes back to the customer. Whether it is a successful purchase order, if it is an unsuccessful purchase order, the poor customer is left in a lurch. Because when an order is shipped, no one of those actors are actually going back to the customer to inform the customer your shipment is on the way. When an order is not shipped and the agent cancels the order, none of those actors once again going back to the customer to say, we are not processing your order. So you now have a broken process within your organization where you are not going back to the customer to inform the customer of the outcome. Think about this in UC's context. Imagine you have submitted an enrollment form up here and all the other processes take place, but no one from the university comes back to you to say, enrollment successful, or your enrollment has been signed off. And so this is what you're going to have to do. This is why business process management is always done by a consultant, someone outside, not working in the organization, because it is very difficult for any one of those four actors. Leave the customer aside, because all of those other four activities are triggered within the organization. So none of those four actors actually go back to the customer to tell the customer what has happened or what is happening. So if you are a customer, you've put in your purchase order, if it's cancelled, you will never know, ever. If your purchase order has been accepted and it is being shipped, neither will you know. Can you see where the problems are with business processes? And this is why it is so hard for you to go into an organization and look at where the problems are. Because sometimes it is not obvious, and sometimes, in some cases, might be a little bit more obvious than the rest. Have a look at this pop quiz question. You have been asked, what is the primary purpose of process modeling? So process modeling is this: drawing business processes, business process notation modeling, or business process modeling notation diagrams are all examples of process modeling. So why do you think we do this? What's the primary purpose for us to do this? How many of you say A, verbal description? How many of you say B, visual illustration? How many of you say C, process life cycle? How many of you say D, creation of specifications for process simulation? You've all got this correct. It is B. It is a visual illustration of processes that work in an organization so that you better communicate where the problems are, so that you get to understand what needs to be fixed. You don't want to look at this and fix the wrong thing. When something's not broken, don't fix it. Only fix the parts that are broken and need fixing. Okay, I'm giving you a slightly complicated diagram. I'm going to take you through this step by step. By now, you should be able to identify the 5 actors. All the 5 actors belong to particular swim lanes. This is a business process called existing order process. Well, everything that you draw will be existing, because that's what you do in step 1. Draw it as is, existing. Tell me how things work existingly. You'll see some new candidates in this diagram. You still see your triangle, that's still a process. You still see the diamond, that is your decision. You see a database here. By now you should know what a database looks like. But you are seeing something special here which you did not see in the earlier diagram. This one here, a process with a plus sign in a square. You see the same thing being depicted here, another process with the plus sign in a square, and also here, another process with the plus sign in a square. You do this because it means you are now going to explode this process into a different business process notation diagram. This is not a process that concerns any of these 5 actors. So what you want to do is now draw this process called accept order process in a fresh, brand new business notation diagram. So what you've got here is another process that needs to be blown out. Check customer credit. So when you look at this one, this is the process for checking customer credit. Now I've shown it to you here because you would realize the actors that are now involved in checking customer credit are very different from the actors that you see here under existing order process. So let's have a look at this business process flow, and again your job is to find where the errors are and what can we possibly do with these errors. What are our solutions? We have the customer, an external party to the business process. We have the salesperson, the operations manager, the credit manager, the sales vice president. All these 4 actors clearly work in 4 different departments, and they are all internal customers to each other. The customer submits an order. Request for quotation is what RFQ means. The salesperson looks at the quotation, prepares that quotation, submits that quotation back to the customer. The customer then decides if the customer then goes back to the salesperson and provides the salesperson with an outcome. Is the customer happy to accept this sales quotation, or is the customer unhappy and decide not to accept the sales quotation? Let's assume that the customer is happy. Look at your yes. You submit the order to your operations manager. The operations manager will now have to check your inventory and your warehouse to see if you have sufficient number of items for this order. So you look at your inventory database and you ask yourself, is there sufficient inventory? If it's a yes, you allocate the inventory, take it out from your database because you don't want to show incorrect inventory items. You allocate the inventory to the order, you approve the order, it goes back to the salesperson, then you look at the credit, and that's a whole process that goes in there. I want you to now look at this process on your own and start finding where the problems are. Follow the process on your own, look at all the arrows and see, have we missed a step? Have we forgotten to inform a particular actor that something has happened or has not happened? Who didn't complete the process correctly? And what should this person now do to complete that process correctly? I want you to I'm going to hint, look at the operations manager. Look at the processes that the operations manager has to do. You should be able to find an error there. Have we missed a step? Once you've looked at the operations manager, look through the steps that the operations manager needs to do, and I want you to follow this process here when the credit is approved. So start by looking at the operations manager's first activity, which is checking for availability. Go through that cycle. If you think there's nothing wrong there, come down here, because what now needs to happen is we look at the credit. I want you to look at the section that says reject order. So the operation manager has looked at its inventory, has allocated inventory for a particular order, but then there is now a possibility that the customer might cancel that order. And when the customer decides to cancel that order, nothing, no one, none of the actors, there are no business processes that go back to operations manager to tell the operations manager, you now don't need to allocate inventory anymore because this order has now been cancelled. Return those items back into your warehouse. So let's assume this customer has ordered 50 cans of paint, and you check your inventory and you have sufficient number of cans. So you allocate 50 cans of paint into this order. However, when the salesperson looks at credit, something goes wrong with the terms and conditions. Perhaps the customer is not happy and the customer says, no, I don't agree with this price that I'm going to pay for 50 cans of paint. When the customer decides to reject the order, nothing goes back, no information goes back to the operations manager. If you don't tell the operations manager that you now don't need the 50 cans of paint, you can now put it back into your warehouse. You might now have a problem where you have unsynced number of paints in your warehouse and doesn't tally with the orders that are going out. Now, when you look at this part where you're checking for customer credit, you will also be able to find some problems here. What I would like for you to do is have a look at this process and see if you think you can identify some problems with the business process, and flick me an email to say, I've looked at it, this is the problem, and this is what should have been done. In your tutorial this week, you will have an opportunity to draw out business processes. It is a scenario where a student is going to enroll in a university, and you have now been asked to draw out a business process notation diagram for that scenario. So when you attempt that activity, the first thing you're going to have to think about is who are the actors in this scenario. And so you decide to draw the number of swim lanes for the actors, and remember, you only put processes that concern a particular actor in that particular swim lane. These are one example that I would like to highlight in relation to what can you possibly do in future. How can you take this further with business processes? So processes in the organization where it's always paper-based, very manual, lots of back and forth sending of documents, possibly processes that require plenty of signatures, changes might happen across those documents. The best way for you to do it is look at a process and then develop systems of softwares to allow you to automate that process or digitize that process. So HR, in any HR department, in any organization, you are dealing with plenty of paperwork, you deal with the number of employees that you have, and you deal with a whole host of different business processes. It could be onboarding a new employee. It could be, what do you do when an employee submits his or her resignation? What do you do when an employee now wants to apply for leave, goes on sabbatical leave, goes on parental leave? What processes do you trigger? And how do you make sure that your processes are done on time, concern the right actors, and that you're not duplicating processes or keeping redundant information inside your system? The next one is with the publishing companies. They deal with deadlines, tight deadlines. They deal with business processes that have to sometimes work in parallel with each other. So when you look at business processes in particular organizations or particular departments, you may realize that some organizations may benefit a little bit more in comparison to other types of organizations. So this is what you do. You look at the business process, you draw the model as it is, and then you decide, what can we do? Do I introduce a new process? For example, in my example here, the way I would go about solving the problem here is to introduce a new process. The new process that I will introduce is, as soon as an order is shipped, I now draw another line going out to the customer, another nice rectangle here if you like, to say inform customer of shipment. Similarly, I would also now create another process here. When the sales rep is notified that the agent has cancelled an order, I will draw yet another line coming out from this box, heading over to the customer, and I say inform customer of cancellation. What I've done is introduced ways of solving the process by adding two more processes. Sometimes it could mean removing processes. So let's go back to this diagram here. When a customer decides not to accept credit terms, I now need to create another process going back to the operations manager to say unallocate inventory. So what I'm doing here is adding a new process. Sometimes you get to remove. Sometimes you have to change the way the process works. So perhaps you might keep the process, but instead of informing one actor of the process, you might inform two different actors of that process. Remember, business process management is looking at existing process and deciding if you can save that process. It means you want to continue to keep that process, but you only want to slightly adjust or modify that process by adding a new process, adding a new actor. If you think that business process cannot be saved, it is completely rubbish, then your approach is not business process management, it is total quality management, the term that I used yesterday in class. So when you become consultants and you walk into your organization, and as you document your as is, you have to ask yourself, is this a savable process? Is this going to be a minor change? Or is this completely rubbish? Doesn't make sense. If your approach is savable, minor change would do, and everything will work fine, go ahead. Business process management. If you look at it and say, nothing here can be saved, everything doesn't work, I need to start a fresh new process altogether, then your approach will be total quality management. If you have done your job correctly, those are the benefits that an employee or an organization would experience. Better customer satisfaction, lower costs, lower resources, very lean usage of resources in an organization, no wastage, improved quality, improved productivity. So this is the end of your non-technical IT lecture with business process management. When I see you next week for the last lecture before your test, you would look at two systems, and then on Tuesday we will only dedicate that for your revision. Is that okay with everyone? Good. Try and look at the practice exam paper if you can. Some of you have told me that you've also gone to the library to have a look at past exam papers. That's all fine. Please don't go beyond 2018. Don't look at any exam paper later than that. Thank you for your attention. See you next week. Yeah.
You know, when you said about the assessment, we need to do it on the Word document.
Yep.
So after when we want to submit it, do we need to change it to PDF file?
No,
or?
Word.
Because last time when we did, like last week, when I finished my statistic, we need to change it to.
No, the instruction is there. It needs to be done.
So from now on, we don't have classes.